You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Most writers and radio show hosts know that to connect with your fans, you need to do more than just write books or record the latest podcasts. There are many different elements that go into forming an online platform, but there are also many hidden traps. To make matters worse, solid advice on how to survive the muddy waters is scarce. In the book Hidden Traps, I talk about some of the important issues of working with an online platform, highlighting traps that could put your physical or internet security at risk or be harmful to your reputation. Are your social media posts just links with a few disjointed words, making you look like someone who can't complete a sentence? Did your new website cost you more than you anticipated? Are you leaking your personal contact details across the web without even knowing it? Then you need Hidden Traps. Hidden Traps is now available in paperback and ebook from a variety of retailers, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Kobo. Visit blackwolfpublications.com for more details.
If you're 85 or younger, would you like peace of mind and comfort for your family? We're Final Expense Direct with an urgent message for you. The average funeral today costs over $8,000, but the most you'll get from government benefits is $255. How will your family pay the difference? We can help. Our senior plans start as low as just $1 a day and pay up to $30,000 for a funeral and other final expenses. Peace of mind is easy. There's no medical exam. You'll have lifetime coverage, and your plan can't be canceled as long as you pay your premiums. Call now for free information about our senior plans. Answer a few simple questions and receive approval right on the phone. Plus, call right now and we'll give you a discount prescription card for free. Call 800-553-8687. That's 800-553-8687. Again, 800-553-8687.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
Everyone loves liberty. Our rights come from God, not the government. So why are you letting other people tell you what's best for your health care? Exercise your freedom with Liberty Health Share. Liberty Health Share is a community of people who voluntarily share one another's medical costs. Liberty Health Share is founded on the idea that most people truly want to help one another. Healthcare sharing allows members to do just that as a true community that supports one another in times of need. Liberty believes people should make decisions for themselves and their families. Members are able to take back the freedom to make their own decisions about their health care. Freedom from guilt or doubt about how your money is used. You have the freedom to direct your health care, not to be dictated to by bureaucrats. Stop letting others tell you what to do and join a community of like-minded people. Exercise your freedom. Join Liberty Health Share and take back the control of your health care while helping those around you. Call Liberty at 855-58-LIBERTY. Again, that's 855-58-LIBERTY for more information, or you can check them out at libertyhealthshare.org. Again, that's libertyhealthshare.org.
My son was in the Army back during Desert Storm, but even then he wanted an MBA. He looked at a dozen schools, but only one offered the online education and flexibility he needed while he was in a tent in Iraq, Grantham University. Turns out that Grantham's been delivering affordable, relevant college and advanced degrees for over 65 years. Heck, if they can deliver a quality education to a soldier in a tent overseas, think about the flexibility Grantham can offer you so you can earn your degree too. It doesn't matter how complicated or full your life is. If getting a degree is on your bucket list, you'll want to do what my son did. You'll want to call Grantham. Find out how easy it is to get started on your education so you can check that college degree off your bucket list. Call Grantham right now, 800-910-1370. That's 800-910-1370. Flexible, affordable, relevant. Call 800-910-1370.
At St. Jude, a family never sees a bill at all. It's like the world has been lifted off of your shoulders.
St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
Sometimes writers feel lost, unsure why a passage may not be working. It takes another set of eyes to help us nurture our writing into full maturity. At Black Wolf Editorial Services, we strive to enable writers to develop and grow, offering manuscript critiques and line edits through a mentoring editorial style. We also offer assistance on generating a writer's bio for your websites. Black Wolf Editorial Services, nurturing your writing into maturity. For a full list of services, visit blackwolfeditorial.com.
You're listening to the Spark Radio Network, internet radio like you've never heard before. Innovation, creativity, and imagination are all said to begin with a spark. So fasten your seatbelt and take the ride of your life and listen for the spark.
Sometimes we need to slow down and remember the simple pleasures in life. Good coffee, good books, and good company. Come on in. Take a seat. The coffee's just been brewed. Let's see who we have in the coffee shop today. Oh, what a beautiful day in the coffee shop. Who could I talk books and writing with? There's Keith Fentonmiller, and he's got his book, Casper Mutzenmacher's Cursed Hat. How are you doing, Keith?
I'm doing great, Jesse. How are you?
Oh, I am doing just fantastic. So, how did you ever come up with Casper Mutzenmacher, Cursed Hat?
Well, I was looking for a title that would just flow, like honey off the tongue, and that's the best I could come up with. No, actually, it's a long. It was a long process. Actually, I spent probably 5 years on this project. It originally began as one book. And at the end of that process, I realized that there were more stories in that single book that I wanted to tell, and I really wanted to expand. And so I ended up expanding it into a trilogy, and what had begun as really just a paragraph in that original book ended up becoming Casper Mutzenmacher's Cursed Hat.
Wow. So why don't you tell me a little bit about Casper Mutzenmacher's Cursed Hat?
Sure. We can just call it the Cursed Hat if you want to, just keep it simple.
Thank you.
So the story is, just in a nutshell, it's a story about a family of Berlin hat makers. They're called the Mutzenmachers, which roughly translates to cap maker, so a type of hat, a cap maker. And they have been cursed to sell hats for 16 centuries. So the story opens in the early 1920s. So they've been cursed to sell hats for 16 centuries, ever since their Greek ancestors stole the god Hermes' wishing hat. And Hermes' wishing hat was essentially a teleportation device that the god would use to bop around the world, but also to transport souls to Hades. So one of their ancestors stole the hat, and essentially the curse requires them to remain in the hat business until they can get this hat back to the god Hermes. And 16 centuries have passed, so they haven't had any luck in that regard. So the story opens up in the 20s during the Jazz Age, but it really starts thrusting forward in terms of the gist of the story in the 30s, when the Nazis rise to power, and there's this mysterious veil-wearing Nazi called Klaus, and he's called the Stealer of Faces. And I won't go into that right now just for this little overview, but suffice it to say, Klaus is not a good guy, and he eventually steals the wishing hat on the eve of Kristallnacht. So this would be 1938, when the family needs it in order to escape Germany. And so that's a problem. And so that kind of takes up almost to the midpoint of the book. And the question is whether, is Casper going to be able to get the hat back and rescue his family? And the fact that there's the second half of the book takes place in Detroit probably, spoils the answer to that question. But it's how they get there, I think, is kind of the interesting part. So, like I said, this is or maybe I haven't said, it's book one of the Life Indigo series, and it's essentially what I would call a family saga that addresses themes of tradition, faith, and identity. and it's set during the Jazz Age, Nazi Germany, World War II Detroit, and beyond.
Okay, first of all, I've got to say I'm fascinated. I am totally fascinated. What age range is this book for?
It's an adult. It's an adult, book for sure. Although the title, maybe it'll sound it could be appropriate for younger ages, but I'd say any mature. Well, I would think even a mature high schooler could read it and enjoy it. So, but it's adult.
How much research into Nazi Germany did you do for this book?
Well, for me, I'd say I did a lot. I didn't travel to Germany, but I certainly read a lot of books, a lot of history about that era, and also trying to track down accounts of what life was like, not so much during World War II, because the book leaves before the outbreak of World War II, but everyday life for everyday Germans during the rise of the Nazis and the changes that they were facing. And so trying to get to the extent I could find them, first-person accounts or at least descriptions of the way life was. So a lot of books on that. And then I read a lot of books on music, on jazz, because jazz is an important component of the book as well. And then in Detroit, picking up in 1943 Detroit, there was this year is the 50th anniversary of the 67 riots, but in Detroit. But the 43 riots were also, before that, were the very big deal, and were a precursor to the 67 riots. And so I did, read a lot on that subject as well. Fortunately, being in the D.C. area, having the Library of Congress, pretty close by, I was able to access some resources that it would have been more difficult had I been anywhere else.
I've got to say, wow, that's a lot of research. Now, for those listeners who don't know what Kristallnacht is, would you care to explain it?
Yeah, so I'm not certain of the exact German translation, but it's commonly called the Night of Broken Glass, and this was in November 1938 when the Nazis whipped up their followers to destroy Jewish shops, to smash the windows, to set fires. Basically, just a night of terror, burned synagogues, and many Jews in Berlin and elsewhere in Germany were arrested and actually sent to concentration camps. Now, at that time, they weren't death camps. Still wasn't pleasant to be sent to be arrested and sent to a concentration camp, a prison camp. But this was really certainly a watershed moment in terms of Hitler's plans for the Jews.
Well, full disclosure, Keith, you are talking to someone who is Jewish.
Uh-huh.
So I knew Kristallnacht, and when I heard you mention it as part of your book, I was immediately intrigued.
Good.
Because I do have ancestral connections to that night.
Right. Yeah. So I also have Jewish heritage. I do not have any direct ancestral connections to that night. I had no relatives in Germany. My people, I guess as you'd say, they came from kind of the Russia and Poland area, but still. Being of Jewish heritage and just, if you do any sort of reflection on what that means, Kristallnacht and the whole Nazi experience is just such a profound thing for Jews and for me, even though it didn't touch me in any kind of physical or material way. It's taken on almost like a powerful mythological significance, this very dark experience that, but for accidents of genetics and history, I could be dead, or a lot of my family members could be dead. And so it's sort of miraculous.
Well, it is a miracle. And while there were many evildoers, there were many good Samaritans that came out of some of the stories of World War II as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So how do you research a magical hat?
Well, that's the nice thing about the fantastical elements of this story. I mean, some of it has to be grounded in how the myths, the Greek myths, are understood and commonly relayed. So there were certain restrictions. For instance, the hat, Hermes' hat, was said to be fashioned from the hide of a griffin, the mythical creature that was part eagle, part lion. So I stuck with that. But there are different visualizations of what this hat looked like. The common one, that at least in popular culture that I was familiar with, was sort of like the FTD hat, kind of a closely fitting hat with wings on the side. But the more I looked into it, it was really just based on a big floppy sun hat, which was called a patassos in Greek. And so that's what I ultimately settled on, kind of a big floppy hat, and kind of invested it with some other attributes. So basically, it's a living thing. It actually runs kind of hot. So that's not something that's in the myth, but I was able to take artistic license and kind of so to speak, flesh out the hat a little bit in a way that would be a little bit unique. So the research wasn't tremendous on the mythical side, but that also gave me the flexibility to improvise and innovate and create something that I wanted to do. And so a lot of the book, these are hat makers, so a lot of the book does deal with different types of hats, and so that required research into actual hat making, and particular hat making in that era, before mass mechanization, assembly line construction, sort of custom making hats. And so that was quite interesting, coming across some of these very, very old books that talk about how to make these hats, creating wire frames, wrapping the fabric around that. So that required a little bit more detailed research.
How many trips to the Library of Congress did you make for your book?
Probably 2 or 3. And some of it actually, some of the research didn't end up panning out for this particular book, but I think will be revealed in the next book, because it dealt with an era in the early 1600s, and the book doesn't address that, but I think I'm going to be dealing with that in the second book. But what I primarily needed the Library of Congress for were 2 things. The Metronome magazine was a music magazine produced out of London, and I think it was operational probably, I don't know, till the 70s, maybe, or the early 80s. But the reason I wanted to look at that magazine was I wanted to see the evolution of ragtime to jazz, in the teens and the 20s to the 30s, and see how kind of the music critics viewed this new art form. Were they looking down on it? Did their opinion change? And so I wanted to kind of see that. And then also, I wanted to get a hold of Amazing Stories magazine. That's essentially a fantasy sci-fi magazine that was very popular in the 30s and 40s, and that plays some role in the story as well. And so that was great. I mean, it wasn't just the Library of Congress is kind of, they have in the DC area, there's different buildings. So I ended up finding some of those at the Air and Space Museum, the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. It was kind of like a NASA type library, and I guess they felt it was fitting to store those magazines there. So
that's fascinating, because most people think of the Library of Congress as just one building.
No, it's a massive complex of I think it's 3 buildings right around the Supreme Court there on Capitol Hill. Beautiful. The main building is a beautiful, beautiful building. The main reading room and everything, and then there's more modern facility, nice marble structure, and then they have other sort of things kind of spread out at buildings across the city. Plus, there's a tremendous amount of online stuff as well, which is a great resource for writers if they want to, hear recordings or see, prints of things, that type of thing, maps. It's a very good resource for that. So you don't necessarily have to travel, to DC if you want to see some of these things.
Well, I think it's fascinating that you put so much time into research, because I think it's the details in a novel that bring it to life.
I totally agree with that, and I certainly find that's true from the reader's perspective. When I'm just reading something, but for my own creative process, details are kind of the fuel of my creative fire. I just find that if I'm staring at a blank screen, not knowing what to type, usually the reason is that I don't have enough details in mind. And that's stuff that I can kind of, play with, improvise, just kind of put myself in the scene so I can really show what's going on. And so, yeah, for me, details are just absolutely the key.
Well, sounds like you have a well-researched book. What was the hardest part of the editing process? What did you have to take out that you wished you didn't, or was a favorite scene or favorite character that it just didn't move the story forward, but you'd written it and you loved it?
Okay, well, that one I can answer pretty straightforwardly. I had written a scene where the main character Casper wishes himself to meet Albert Einstein, because he's trying to figure out when the story was going along this line, I was originally thinking that Casper was going to try to destroy the hat, because the hat using the hat actually can be quite dangerous. Creates this addictive heroin-like rush, and so in order to save himself, he thought he would try to destroy the hat, and so he settled on the smartest man in the world, Albert Einstein, who at that time in the story happened to be traveling through Japan. And so that was interesting. Just kind of there was an article that someone wrote shortly after Einstein's trip to Japan about his travels through there, and so that was cool. Tracking down that article. My brother-in-law is an astrophysicist at University of Maryland, and he was able to get access to this obscure journal and send me the article. So that was nice. But I wrote this very involved chapter where he's meeting Albert Einstein, and Einstein, thinks he's a kook. Of course, what scientist wouldn't? It's such a fantastical claim. But then he demonstrates, the hat to him, and then there's some interesting discussion about, the Nazis who are starting to come on the scene at that time, and Albert Einstein being Jewish. And so, so I was sad that it just didn't fit with the ultimate narrative. But, that's one thing, experienced writer learns, is that, they say, kill your darlings, or, the different ways of saying it. But, ultimately what controls is the narrative, and to make it as tight as possible, you cannot keep things in there or force things in there that are extraneous. And in this case, it just didn't fit. I basically revised the storyline enough that I wasn't going to go that route. So I was bummed about that. In terms of difficulty, I don't know if that was the most difficult decision, because I think the difficulty, this book for me was such a learning process. As I mentioned, I had originally written this. It is one book, basically set in the present day, with some references to historical events. And then, suddenly now I'm writing two other novels that are both historical. And then I have this tremendous amount of material, and figuring out, well, how am I going to shape this into a book that's not 1,000 pages long? Because no one's going to want to publish that. It's too long. And figuring out, well, what story should I tell? What is the story I should tell? What is the fundamental essence of the particular story? And that to me was the most difficult part of the process, because I had written a lot of scenes. Certainly a lot of the things resonated with me, but I needed to find that thread that was going to, make the narrative as tight as possible. And so that was really a learning process. It just took a lot of time, a lot of experimentation, a lot of feedback from beta readers and editors and things like that. And, it really, for me, it took a village to get it in a shape that I felt, was a tight, cohesive story.
Now, you chose the traditional publishing path. What
Yes.
made you go traditional versus self-pub?
Well, I think, I don't know. I'm not sure why an author of fiction wouldn't try the traditional route first, just because a traditional publisher is going to have the infrastructure in place, assuming that, they're fairly well established. They're going to have the infrastructure in place as far as publishing, editing, cover design, helping with promotion. They're going to have established social media channels, as well as just expertise on advertising and helping you, or at least giving you guidance on some of the things, a lot of the things that the individual author has to do. Now, it's my understanding that even if so I published through Curiosity Quills Press, which is considered is classified as a small publisher. They publish about 75 books a year, which seems like a lot to me, but I guess that's the difference between a small publisher and kind of like a major house, the Penguins and all those types of the world. But even whether you go with, a big house or a smaller publisher like I did, a lot still falls on the author to promote his or her work. It's really, and this is what I've heard at, countless conferences and from agents and from, publishing houses. Unless you're publishing the next Harry Potter or something like that, you can't necessarily count on the publisher to be doing everything that possibly can be done to promote your work. And so a lot of it really falls on the author to establish a social media platform, to be thinking about different types of advertising opportunities, like on doing targeted advertising on Facebook, and which by the way is really not that expensive. Contacting bookstores for reading and signing events. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but I think there is an advantage to, well, first if you have a publisher, you're able to follow in their coattails a little bit, to ride on their reputation. So that carries a certain amount of weight, I suppose. They have a fan base, people say, oh yeah, I read a lot of books by that publisher, so that's good. And then, so you have that sort of that credibility component. And then aside from that, you're able to draw on their expertise and infrastructure, and they will, contribute somewhat, depending on your contract, to your marketing budget and to the marketing efforts. So, for me, it's not a question of, why would you, but why wouldn't you try that first? I know you can get a better deal in terms of royalties through self-publishing, but it all boils down to, well, how much are you going to be able to sell? And if you don't sell very much, it's not going to really matter if you're getting a higher royalty.
I think that is a fantastic point. Now, what advice would you give to the new writer who is just starting out along the querying/publishing and trying to make all these decisions?
So, okay, well, I think someone who's written has a novel or whatever it is, and it feels like it's as in good a shape as it can be, that type of person you're talking about, and is ready
Yes.
to introduce it to the world. Yeah. Well, of course, that's always the question about whether it really is ready. A lot of people, it's like, I don't say a lot of people, but I think there's an impulse to say, okay, once you hit type the end, okay, it's ready. And I just know through my own personal experience that it's oftentimes not. And that you really do need to have the work beta read. If you can afford it, hire a developmental editor, preferably someone who's worked in-house at a major publisher, who can review your work for flaws, whether it's plot holes or whether it's a lot of telling instead of showing, that type of thing. But assuming that it's as polished and it's ready to go out in the world, you're done with it. Well, then it's going to first depend on the genre that your work falls in. If we're talking about a novel, if it's a literary fiction, if it's commercial fiction, and then within commercial fiction, if it's in a if it's fantasy, if it's a mystery. So you have to kind of figure that out. And then if you want to, this is what I try to do. I unsuccessfully, by the way. I do not have an agent, but I did try to go that route because that's really the only avenue, with one exception that I know of, to get your work in front of a major publishing house, is that you need an agent. So if you're gonna, the query letter is a completely different beast than the actual creative writing that's behind it. It's really has to be, and there's lots of information online as sample query letters and things like that. But that's also something that for something that's essentially 3 or 4 paragraphs, you can spend many hours on trying to develop the pitch. It's a completely different animal, and actually developing the pitch actually can be a very useful exercise in terms of seeing if your story has the right shape. Because if you can't, putting aside something that may be extremely experimental, if you can't distill your story down to, 5 or 6 sentences, obviously you're losing a lot of nuance, you're losing a lot of characters and setting. But if you can't get that down, then there might be an issue somewhere. Maybe there's no conflict, or maybe there's no antagonist here. There's something missing. And actually, one of the things that I found tremendously helpful, there's the New York Writers Workshop in New York City. They run these pitch conferences a couple times a year, some for fiction, some for nonfiction. And I did a couple of the fiction ones, and you spend, 2.5, 3 days in small groups, working on developing your pitch and crafting that, and then at the end of the whole process, you get to pitch your book to acquisition editors from major publishing houses, and sometimes they'll request to see some pages, which is very exciting. Usually doesn't lead anywhere, but it's certainly possible. But better than that, I think, for this purpose, is the fact that you get direct feedback from them about your pitch. So that was a real, it's an expense, obviously, going to New York. The conference itself isn't that expensive, but, spending 3 days in New York, there's an expense. But, and there are online options as well, I'm sure, for developing pitches. So you don't need to spend a huge amount of money to do this, but I would highly recommend before sending anything out that the author makes some kind of investment in crafting the pitch, not just using beta readers, but actual professionals, whether it's other professional writers or agents, that type of thing, who run some sort of online pitch crafting thing, and because that's the key thing. The agent is gonna read the first paragraph, and if they're not interested or turned off, that's it. It doesn't matter what the rest of the letter says, and you really need to know what should be in there and what shouldn't be, and kind of the proper tone. And so it's a lot of effort for something that's very short, but it's very critical, because that's your face. That's the first thing that agents are going to see about you, and so you better make it as best as possible. You never get a chance to make a second impression. You never get a second chance to make a first impression, and so you better take that heart there. So that's what I would recommend, crafting a really good pitch. And then there are different ways to research, agents who represent the type of book that you represent. So, you look for comparable works that are somewhat similar to yours in whatever way, and find out who their agents are. You can do that through various ways that I won't go into, but that's kind of a good way, because that's also something that you would want to include in a query letter is, I noticed that you represent, so-and-so who wrote this book. Well, this is my book, is similar in tone or in content, or it's, that type of book. That shows the agent that you've actually put some thought, into reaching out to them. It's not just some sort of email blast, that you've actually tailored it to them, and that will keep their attention and keep them interested. So you don't want to send out a mass mailing. You really do want to do the agent search sort of in waves. Maybe go pick 10 or 15 agents at a time, and really spend the time and make those letters targeted. So that was kind of a long monologue, but that's what I've sort of picked up in the various conferences and just through experience of what seems to work.
Well, I think that is fantastic advice, and we have come to to the point, since you mentioned expenses, where it is time to pay those radio station bills. So I'm going to pour Keith another cup of coffee. Might want to make it decaf, but I'm going to pour him another cup of coffee. And we are going to take a commercial break. And I will see you on the other side.
Most writers and radio show hosts know that to connect with your fans, you need to do more than just write books or record the latest podcasts. There are many different elements that go into forming an online platform, but there are also many hidden traps. To make matters worse, solid advice on how to survive the muddy waters is scarce. In the book Hidden Traps, I talk about some of the important issues of working with an online platform, highlighting traps that could put your physical or internet security at risk, or be harmful to your reputation. Are your social media posts just links with a few disjointed words, making you look like someone who can't complete a sentence? Did your new website cost you more than you anticipated? Are you leaking your personal contact details across the web without even knowing it? Then you need Hidden Traps. Hidden Traps is now available in paperback and ebook from a variety of retailers, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Kobo. Visit blackwolfpublications.com for more details.
If you're 85 or younger, would you like peace of mind and comfort for your family? We're Final Expense Direct with an urgent message for you. The average funeral today costs over $8,000, but the most you'll get from government benefits is $255. How will your family pay the difference? We can help. Our senior plans start as low as just $1 a day and pay up to $30,000 for a funeral and other final expenses. Peace of mind is easy. There's no medical exam. You'll have lifetime coverage, and your plan can't be canceled as long as you pay your premiums. Call now for free information about our senior plans. Answer a few simple questions and receive approval right on the phone. Plus, call right now and we'll give you a discount prescription card for free. Call 800-553-8687. That's 800-553-8687. Again, 800-553-8687.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
Everyone loves liberty. Our rights come from God, not the government. So why are you letting other people tell you what's best for your healthcare? Exercise your freedom with Liberty Health Share. Liberty Health Share is a community of people who voluntarily share one another's medical costs. Liberty Health Share is founded on the idea that most people truly want to help one another. Healthcare sharing allows members to do just that as a true community that supports one another in times of need. Liberty believes people should make decisions for themselves and their families. Members are able to take back the freedom to make their own decisions about their healthcare. healthcare, freedom from guilt or doubt about how your money is used. You have the freedom to direct your healthcare, not to be dictated to by bureaucrats. Stop letting others tell you what to do and join a community of like-minded people. Exercise your freedom. Join Liberty HealthShare and take back the control of your healthcare while helping those around you. Call Liberty at 855-58-LIBERTY. Again, that's 855-58-LIBERTY for more information, or you can check them out at libertyhealthshare.org. Again, that's libertyhealthshare.org.
Sometimes riders feel lost, unsure why a passage may not be working. It takes another set of eyes to help us nurture our writing into full maturity. At Black Wolf Editorial Services, we strive to enable writers to develop and grow, offering manuscript critiques and line edits through a mentoring editorial style. We also offer assistance on generating a writer's bio for your websites. Black Wolf Editorial Services, nurturing your writing into maturity. For a full list of services, visit blackwolfeditorial.com.
All right, thank y'all for hanging in there with us while we paid those radio station bills. And yes, Keith Fentonmiller, our wonderfully experienced and informative author, is still with us. So, Keith, how does having a day job and a family affect the amount of time you have for writing?
Well, that's a great question. I actually think, writing aside, I think actually having a family, particularly my kids are older now. I've got a senior in high school and a sophomore in college. But particularly when they were younger, I found that even though it was such an intense period and, I was spending a lot of time with them, it made me more efficient and more focused with the free time that I did have. And so, and I think that's actually true, in workplaces generally, that a lot of workers with families tend to be more efficient at work. They want to do their job and then get home rather than just kind of gabbing away and things like that. So they're really, for me anyway, I've found that there's a lot of downtime just in the course of the day, even if it's 15 minutes here, a half an hour there, riding in on the metro. And these things add up. They really do. And sometimes you can write in longer spurts. Sometimes, you don't do any writing. So it can be done. I've lived it. If it's something that you really want to do, well, for me, it hasn't been a chore. I just really enjoy it. There certainly are frustrations in the creative process, like where am I going to go and this and that. But I just like sitting down and doing it. It's therapeutic. It's just part of my overall approach to life in terms of self-examination and doing that through the medium of creative writing. So if you make it a priority, you will have time. Even if you have a job, even if you have a spouse and children. There's always time, maybe not as much time as you would like, but I guarantee you if you were somehow given, say, a 26-hour day, you would find some way to fritter away those extra 2 hours. So I think it's better to have the constraint, to have the little sense of pressure, the sense of urgency, and I think that actually can improve the creative process.
I think that's fantastic advice because I'm not a writer. I have talked to many writers who are not published who say, well, I just don't have time to have the time I need to write. And I think that is outstanding advice. Now, Are you a plotter? Are you the type of person you outline this book from A to Z, every little step along the way, and you know everything that's going to happen before you put pen to paper? Or are you the pantser who just lets the character run away with the story? Or are you the hybrid where you know plot point A, plot point B, and plot point C, but how we get from A to B and B to C is anybody's guess?
I would say no across the board, if that's even possible. So I started out, as I thought, as a plotter, trying to, or did develop a very detailed outline, starting at the most basic kind of arc of the plot, and then characters, and then filling it in with, details that I want to work in. And I think that really is, for me anyway, that was an excellent starting point. But, it turned out as I was writing, that maybe the story that was developing was different than what I had planned out with the intellectual side of my brain. As your subconscious mind is drawn into the process, and you start creating this craziness called a story, it's going to go in directions that you cannot foresee. And so I think, unless you're writing, say, like a cozy mystery or some sort of thriller, I think it's a bad idea. I would strongly discourage, just being a hell-bent plotter. I just think you need to leave yourself open to experimentation, to going to places that you think are going to take you off track. And maybe they will. Sometimes they do. But other times they're going to take you to a much more interesting place. And so I think having a plot, having a detailed outline is a very good start. It just gets you thinking kind of about the mechanics, about the bone structure of your story. But you have to be prepared for the real likelihood that this creature that you've mapped out, that you've created the blueprints for, may end up metamorphosizing into a completely different animal by the time you're done, and then you may even change that animal again, like I did in this story. I just couldn't figure. I'd written a lot. I did a lot of. I probably wrote, I don't know, this particular book, which is 120,000 words. I probably wrote at least 300,000 words, and through the process of discarding, revising, trimming, setting aside, I got it down to 120,000. So, some of that was from just experience, having to go through the process, this painful process of giving birth to this book. An analogy that I really have no right to claim, being man, but I guess that's the closest creatively I can think of it, because it was very painful. There's a lot of bloating and discomfort throughout the whole process.
I think every author sees their book, no matter what gender they are, as their child or their baby.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes you produce an abomination. Other times, but the good thing about, giving birth to this type of baby is you can actually, shape its growth. You can, add limbs. You can, remove its spine. You can, do all sorts of Frankensteinian things, to make it what you want. And hopefully at the end of the process, it'll feel right. And that's where I ended up. Like when it was finished, really, really finished, I knew it. It just felt right at a gut level. And that's for me, that's what I strive to get to. And I can't do that. I can't do that by just creating this really cool plot. Not for the type of writing that I do.
Well, I think that is both fantastic advice and interesting to hear, because how many times have you had a favorite author or a favorite celebrity of some type, and you would love just a little peek inside their world and a little peek inside their head? I think everybody enjoys those little tidbits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, because it's intimidating. When you read a great piece of fiction, you're like, oh my God, I could never produce something like this. But you have no idea what it took to get to that state. You don't know, how many revisions, how many, horrible drafts and things like that, how much input went into creating this very, finely polished diamond. And so I think you have to, not be discouraged by you shouldn't be discouraged as a writer from reading a great piece of fiction. If anything, that should be more fuel. You can, kind of absorb the language and the artistry, into yourself, kind of internalize it, and it will come out in some way, one way or another, in your process. But yeah, it's you just have to be prepared for the mess, and just be very sanguine about it, that it's all going to work out. It'll work out. That's what I have to keep telling myself. And it does. It always does. It might take a little bit longer than I hope. Sometimes it's very fast, but you just have to have the attitude, you know what? This seems like this is impossible. I can't resolve this. I should just chuck it. But you just have to take a step back and say, you know what? I have faith in my creative process. I have faith. I'll do it. It might take me a couple of nights of sleep, some good dreams, several walks in the park, but I'm going to figure it out. And you do. You just have to have faith.
Well, I think that is fantastic. Now, you mentioned a sequel.
Mm-hmm.
Any clue when that's going to be available for everyone to read? Or are we still in the writing and painful bloated process with that one?
Yeah, I'm still experiencing significant bloating and cramping and strange cravings. I'm hoping that it'll be out maybe late next year, but I'm not going to rush it, and I expect to be. I'll definitely have it done and polished by the end of the year. So if that actually happens, then it could be out by the end of 2018.
Well, just a little note. Make sure you let me know, because I love repeat guests in the coffee shop.
Oh, great.
Now, how did you get to know Casper? Was it just by writing him, or did you sit down and kind of interview him and ask him questions? How did you come up with Casper Mutzenmacher as a character? Not just the name, but how did you get beyond the name?
Yeah. Actually, I think the name sort of came later. One of the most significant people in my life was my grandfather, my father's father, Merle Fenton. He was this short Jewish man with a big nose. He was a physician, one of the first allergists ever, in the world. Allergy was a very new area of medicine back in the late 20s and early 30s. And he was I always admired him. He just had this wonderful personality, this strong personality that really kept the family, I felt, bound together. And when he died in 1997, the extended family really disintegrated. And I think observing that just made me realize just what an impressive figure he was. So a lot of Casper is kind of molded on him, both, physically. Casper resembles him, although Casper has a big cheek scar, and he plays the cornet, which my grandfather didn't do. So I think that animated a lot of that. And certainly I'm not, my grandfather wasn't a perfect person. No one is. And, I know that he made mistakes or had flaws in terms of the type of parent he was. And Casper is a very flawed father. And that's one of my greatest fears is being a flawed father. And I think I invested a lot of that anxiety and reflection into his character. And the curse, I think, kind of relates to my struggles with my Jewish faith. Although I recognize my Judaism as a significant part of my heritage, I'm not a practicing Jew, and I went through a lot of reflection on Judaism and really just religion generally, and the role of tradition, wherever that comes from. Certainly, religion is a tradition, and a curse is a tradition. And for me, the curse is kind of a safer way to reflect on, comment on, criticize something that is really a significant part of my heritage without creating too much offense. And because I think I think traditions, as we understand them, can be a curse if they refuse to change with the times. And so I was using the curse kind of as a metaphor to deal with those types of struggles, which I think is a fairly common struggle.
I think that's a fascinating insight to the curse, and I'm not sure it's a leap I would have made on my own.
Yeah, in fact, I don't think some of these things I didn't realize when I set out. It was really towards the end of the process when I was trying to figure out, well, what is the story that I want to tell? What is it that I'm really doing here? And that was really much more towards the tail end of the process when this is really a story about tradition, about how a tradition gets passed on from one generation to the next, from Casper through his son, Duke, and then ultimately to his grandson, Chance. And what Chance, who really is kind of a stand-in for me in the story, what he does with it. When he's a very, he's a lawyer, he's someone who's focused on rationality and science, and what does he do with this very odd tradition which runs in the face of everything that he accepts about his reality? And how do you balance that? Because even if a tradition is flawed, even if you see its problems and its ridiculousness, it still has value because it's bound these generations together. So, it's been such a critical source of identity that you don't want to necessarily just chuck the whole thing. So there's this real ambivalence, and that's what the Chance character, the grandson, ultimately has to deal with, and that struggle will persist through the next two books.
I think that's fascinating. I quite frankly do. So what was the hardest part about creating a writer's platform?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that most writers would be averse to being very active on social media and kind of, just it not feeling authentic. To be out there tweeting and whatever, on Facebook and all that stuff. I don't know. It just strikes me that most authors might be a little bit more introverted or reticent about, doing that sort of thing. But it really, I've done what needs to be done, which is you should have a presence on. You should have an author Facebook page. It's not a big deal to set it up. And you should have a Twitter account. And there are ways, there are things out there to make the process easier in terms of, helping you identify followers, helping you post content. A lot of it you can share other people's content. If you've written other things, you can link to that, creating your own your own website that kind of aggregates some biographical information, your writing, if you're doing any events. It's just, and when you start out, it might be pretty sparse, but if you keep writing, you don't have to just write novels. You can write short stories, you can write flash fiction, you can write poems. These things, you're sort of building this resume, and it takes time, but you really need to do that because I've heard from many agents that they will check to see if you have your own website. They will check to see if you're on Twitter, because they don't think that you are serious about making the transition from writer to author if you're not doing those things, if you're not out there. And that's kind of the big shocker, I think, to a lot of writers, is that they think all the work is writing the book, and then, okay, maybe I'll do a little promotion, when in fact, really 50% of the work is writing, and then the other 50% is putting yourself out there. Not prostituting yourself, but just in terms of spending a little bit of time, you don't have to spend a lot of time on social media, but also reaching out to bookstores, to conferences, to talking to people about your work. There's this whole social aspect to being an author, and that's like trying to draw this distinction between writer and author. Writer is the creative person there at the computer creating this beautiful thing. The author is the person who treats his writing like a business, in a sense, and everyone has their own tolerance level about how much time and effort they want to put into that end of it, but you really do have to spend a good chunk of time doing those things. That's, showing the world that you're serious about your writing.
Well, I think that is fantastic advice. And as I do with every guest in the coffee shop, why don't you give out your social media contact information?
Okay, well, you can find my author Facebook page and my Twitter handle, which is at @Fentonmiller. You can find all that information at my website www.keithfentonmiller.com. I don't know if I'll go into spelling that because this might spill into your next show, but hopefully in the program notes or people can find the spelling of my name, but it's there. You can also go to curiosityquills.com. Curiosity Quills is my publisher, and you can look me up that way, and that'll link to my personal website and Facebook and Twitter and all that good stuff.
Well, I think this has been a fantastically fun and informative interview, and I'm going to snatch that copy of Casper Mutzenmacher's Cursed Hat off the table and pour myself another cup of coffee and settle down with a good book. And for all of you trying to track me down, you can find me on Twitter at Jessie's POV, and you can email me at the station at Jessie, Jessie, at KLRNRadio.com. And don't forget, you can always check out jessiescoffeeshop.com for the latest episodes. And on that note, I will see you next time in the coffee shop.